Hello and welcome to Messenger TV. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was indicted in 2019 on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, all of which he has denied repeatedly. He has called the trial against him as an orchestrated left-wing witch hunt meant to topple a democratically elected right-wing leader. In one of the cases, he and his wife Sarah are accused of accepting more than $260,000 worth of luxury goods, such as cigars, jewelry, and champagne, from billionaires in exchange for political favors. In two other cases, Netanyahu is accused of attempting to negotiate more favorable coverage from two Israeli media outlets. The Prime Minister has requested multiple postponements to the trial since it began in May 2020. Today, we are joined by Middle East analyst Don Davis in this interview. Don, welcome back. What's the political future of Netanyahu like with the court turning up the heat on him? Would this land him in jail? What's your take on this?
As we've talked before, this is very speculative on what I'll cover with Netanyahu, because what I say now may change tomorrow or the next day because events are still shifting around and altering, and there might be new events come to light as well with Netanyahu and his trial and possible elections, or if the government collapses. We'll just have to wait and see. First, let me mention that if the worst scenario for Netanyahu happens, there's been past history of prime ministers getting jail time for being proven guilty on indictments, and there's been deals made. And there's also been talk about Netanyahu retiring. So there are many options that can happen, and I wouldn't be able to, be clairvoyant and guess what would be, because it could be several things. The first thing I want to point out, though, in all of this news that's going on about Netanyahu and Israel, is that I think international listeners need to understand that the Israeli news, they are very similar, if you wanted to compare it to United States news now, in that as we watch the news during the elections of the presidency of the United States, news agencies were leaning towards what you would say Democrat towards spinning, and the ones that were leaning towards Republican type spinning. And it's the same thing here in Israel. And one could probably argue correctly that the majority of the news, the big ones and the most watched here in Israel, are probably against Trump. They're probably against Netanyahu. They're very for Trump. They represent either what they called the old Labor Party, or what people would call center, or the conservatives would call left. And so they would be considered by Netanyahu or his party as being on the opposition. Therefore, just remember when you're hearing or reading news, depending on what newspaper or what's online or what's on the TV, on where the source is coming from. If the source is coming and it's very cut and dried in Israel, you can tell right away when you come into Israel on watching TV, especially if you can understand Hebrew and reading the reports either in English or in Hebrew, you can understand very clearly that certain medias are extremely agenda biased and driven. There's no hiding it. So that's important to understand. Even some people in the courts are in the opposition, similar to what is going on with Trump in the United States. The problem with that type of reporting is that one could say that it's what we call agenda-driven, or driving the news, trying to affect change through repetition of negative events. And I guess that didn't work too much for Trump. because he was voted into office. We have yet to see what kind of continual onslaught that Netanyahu's gotten in the news in Israel. We'll have to wait and see how that is. However, what they've been saying has not anything has come to light yet as far as being concretely, maintained as guilty that he's serving any time or has to remove himself from office. I actually began writing about this stuff in 2018. It began even before that. That's how long this type of stuff is going on, and Netanyahu is still available to be in office. Therefore, I think it's very important for me to point out what kind of individual Netanyahu is. I can say it in one word: he's a survivor. Even his enemies would say that. He's a master deal maker. He's an alpha in behavior. He's been in combat, special forces, wounded in combat, and in special operations. I think he's been wounded actually several times. And I have to explain that there's a certain type of behavior also that comes with being a commando in special operations when you're deep in somebody's territory and you are successfully able to go in and out. That really normally enables people to be a real solid and robust and really not too afraid of much of anything. And very few leaders, world leaders, and even leaders here in Israel, or potential leaders, can say the same that Netanyahu has as far as the total experience that he has, not only in combat, but on the international arena as a leader. He's not intimidated by individuals. He's not intimidated by governments, militaries, courts, and lawyers. He's been there. He's done that. He's been in politics as an official for many years, in and out. One could tag him as a total politician, in that he has finance, politics, war, and very long-term relationships, and some would say good relationships with international leaders. He also has an outstanding command of the English language, being educated, or much of it, part of his education in the United States, and he has an American, or what would USA accent. He's a very, very talented speaker, and in both his own native tongue of Hebrew and in English, he is very persuasive in his speaking. So it could be argued that he's the most experienced domestic and international official here in Israel, and maybe some even might, put him in competition with world leaders as far as his experience is concerned. And all this is very noteworthy of what kind of individual he is and how he survives. If I remember correctly, he's been in office 3 times. I think his last term ended in 2021. And he was also prime minister prior to that for a period of time. And now he's back in office in 2022. And the reason why I bring this up is because no matter all the charges against him, he's still in office. And he's still the leader of his party. So, getting back to the news, what a lot of these things, news media or whatever is being thrown out about him, nothing has been enough to override him as his character and staying in office. Doesn't mean people like him, but it means nothing has been to overcome him as being in office. Some may refer to that as his spectacular deal making. Again, this is important to point out because no matter what the media is proclaiming, Netanyahu is popular. He does have a good amount of supporters, which got him into contention to be in office in the first place. And then he was a good enough deal maker to get back in office in 2022 and have enough votes to do that. So against all what the media and what people would like to have happen and are saying, the mathematical numbers against how he has been voted in or how he got the votes or how he gets in office point the other way and don't lie. He has support or he wouldn't be in office. Despite people not liking Netanyahu, I believe they believe it's their choice, maybe not their first choice, but their choice during these global and what the Jewish nation of Israel believes is horrific circumstances going on in the world right now. They feel safe with Netanyahu, at least during this time of war, at least compared to the other leaders that are and were in then contention. However, let's say this time around they do find something and they remove him from office, or he decides to just call new elections. The status quo here in Israel, as far as what I just mentioned, as far as global threats, and all these wars and international courts and all these fears that the Israelis have, the status quo here is not changed. And so if Netanyahu, let's say, does go for re-election and is still the head of his own party, we may have a complete repeat of what put him in office in 2022, because there are literally almost no changes of events and status quo. What got him in office in 2022? All the conflict and inter-domestic conflict and international conflict, but the other leaders just were not prominent enough or strong enough or good enough deal makers to get them in office. And yet Netanyahu, despite all what the media said and people that say don't like him, he had the support and was able to make the deals to get him back in office. And I truly see that same scenario stands right now if he was to call for re-elections or he was removed by some reason without being in jail. Now, there can be events that happen that change this right now and overnight and after I finish this interview, but I'm speaking about right now as I'm speaking. There has not been a change of events neither in Netanyahu and his power arrangements, because he's always making deals to fill the vacuum and the gaps, and in what's happening from the outside forces that are against Israel that makes everybody in Israel fearful tremendously to keep in a strong man like Netanyahu. Although I would say that after this war is over, if Netanyahu is the leader, like Winston Churchill, I believe there's a good chance the Israelis will find no good use for him as a leader anymore when the conflict is past and newly forgotten. Because after war or traumatic events, people commonly want a relaxed atmosphere, and they want no reminders of the conflicts in the past.